Pfizer beat on revenue for Q1, seeing a 77% increase in revenue year over year, bolstered by its COVID-19 vaccine and Paxlovid antiviral COVID-19 treatment pill. Joining us now to discuss these earnings a little bit further is Mizuho America's Managing Director, Vamil Divan. Vamil, thanks for taking the time here with us today. You largely maintain your rating on Pfizer here. What particularly are you going to be listening for on the earnings call? You mentioned that they're going to be using the proceeds from sales of Comirnaty and Paxlovid to boost their longer-term outlooks there as well.
Yes, I think there's a few different parts here to this. I think the vaccine sales this quarter were very strong for sure. Paxlovid, the pill sales, on the other hand, were pretty light and below what people were expecting. And maybe the most important part is that looking at their guidance for the full year, they did not increase the guidance for either of those products going forward. They update their guidance every 3 months based on the orders they have sort of at the time of their earnings. So essentially, they have not gotten a lot of new orders for the vaccine or the pill since sort of mid-January through mid-April. So that's interesting. I think there will still be more orders as we go through the year, but probably not to the extent that people were hoping earlier in the year. So we'll see sort of how this sort of evolves, but that's certainly going to be a big area of focus. And then the second will be, as you mentioned, the proceeds. Pfizer has a lot of their key products that are on the market right now losing patent protection later this decade. So what are they going to do in terms of acquisitions to build out their pipeline, develop other things from their own pipeline to shore up the longer term outlooks? I'm sure there'll be a lot of questions asked there too, just in terms of their business development strategy.
Vamil, I want to dig into what you were talking about with both Paxlovid and the vaccine. Paxlovid in particular, what's going on there with the lagging sales, do you think? Do you think it's being underprescribed? Do you think it's a supply issue, getting it to where people need it? What's happening?
Yeah, I think there's a few different factors. I don't think it's much of a supply issue now. I think initially there was a supply issue, and doctors were being pretty cautious on who they prescribed it to. But now, at least in the U.S., it seems like there's enough supply. I think doctors may still not really know how to write it, or just kind of thinking I should save this for very high-risk patients instead of using it a little bit more broadly. I think patients also are just saying I can just kind of, there's a sense now I can just deal with COVID. I don't need a prescription to take to shorten my symptoms, especially if I'm not a higher risk sort of patient. And then I think outside the U.S., what I think is interesting, you remember last year there was really a sort of surge in people wanting to secure supply of the vaccine for their citizens. Here, it doesn't seem like that's the issue. I think because there's a lot of supply, and Pfizer said they'll be making it 120 million courses over the course of the year. So I think governments are just feeling if we need it, we can sign a contract a few months from now. Let's worry right now about everything else that's going on in the world regarding Russia and Ukraine and the energy crisis, all the other things that people have been dealing with the last few months. And in some ways, I think COVID sort of taking a little bit of a back seat, and that we'll get to putting our orders in for Paxlovid when we need to, as opposed to with the vaccine where there was a real urgency to get the supply before it ran out.
Your point on key drugs losing patent protection is well taken. Do you think Pfizer needs to go large on acquisitions, and where do you think they need to look?
Yeah, I don't think they necessarily need to go large. They did one deal for the Arena Pharma a few months back. I think that's the kind of deal is 5 to 10 billion sort of range. Get in a nice pipeline asset or a couple of pipeline assets. They have enough cash now, firepower, so to speak, to do multiple deals like that. So I think they can do several deals this year, even a few more next year, or 5, 6, 7 of these sorts of deals where they're bringing in sort of 6, 7, 10 pipeline assets. Then see how things will evolve over the next year and a half with their own pipeline. Do they have success, like they're hoping to have? How do these deals play out? The Arena deal looks like it's playing out well. Do these other assets that they bring in also play out the way they want them to? If so, then maybe they don't need to do anything large. But if they're still struggling and there's still a big sort of sales decline expected sort of starting in 2026, 2027, and they're going to lose a lot of earnings power, then they might need to go larger, more financially driven deal, something where they can get some more synergies, cost savings, the kind of thing we generally see pharma companies do when they're approaching major patent expirations. But I don't think they need to do that right now, and I don't think they will. I think right now, focus on building out the pipeline and see if they can drive it more from an innovation perspective.
A lot of that pipeline is going to be derivative of how some of the vaccines that they've developed as well are even covered as part of healthcare plans in the future. The different kind of negotiations that they're going to be going through over these coming months and years, even on that front, what does that set up for how Pfizer is going to be able to have this other pipeline of future research development that's also going to yield more products?
Yeah, there's a few different parts to that. I think certainly the COVID pill and the vaccine are obviously very unique situations. They are developing some vaccines like for Lyme disease, for another viral condition, RSV. Those would be more sort of traditional virus vaccines that they could kind of get out there, might be sort of approved and reimbursed for certain patient populations, maybe those patients that are at higher risk of developing those. And then ultimately you need to get the CDC, and the federal guidelines that say that this is something that those patients should get. And then usually they do get reimbursed from a vaccine perspective. And then they have another number of other products that they're working on, gene therapies, some things that are for rarer conditions, some in the oncology, in the immunology space. So those are some more traditional sort of pharma products where, again, we got to see what the data shows, get them approved, get them to the market, and then work with the payers to get reasonable reimbursement. So a lot of that's going to be data driven. They've had good success with a heart medication called Vyndamax that seems to be doing very well. But I think they need more of that. And as long as they show good value, I think the payers will support those products getting used in the appropriate patients. And they're a little bit of just a victim of their own success because they've had a lot of success, and these products that they've had for a long time are now going away. The vaccine and the pill have sort of raised the bar for what their current sales numbers are, and so they are going to come down. What can they do to sort of offset some of that decline? But again, if they have good innovation, the payers have generally shown they will pay for it. It's when you have a Me Too product, something that's just sort of incremental advance over what's currently on the market, that's when the payers really seem to push back a lot more.